What if a painting could see you and then become you? In The Curse of the Portrait, Evelyn Carter steps into the Black Hollow Museum and into a nightmare that blurs the line between art and reality. The more you look, the more it takes. Will she escape before the painter finishes his masterpiece? Or will her face join the wall of the forgotten? If you love spine-chilling stories, mysterious atmospheres, and mind-twisting horror, you're in the right place. The first time Evelyn Carter saw the portrait, it was tucked away in the west wing of the Black Hollow Museum. Hidden behind thick, velvet curtains, it hung in a narrow hallway that most visitors passed without a second glance. The lighting there was dim, almost too dim for such a painting, but perhaps that was the point. She hadn't come to Black Hollow looking for anything eerie. She was in town researching early Gothic architecture for a freelance article. But a sudden rainstorm and a flickering street lamp led her to the museum's shadowed entrance like a moth to a flame. Evelyn moved quietly down the corridor, her boots echoing softly on the polished floor. A dripping sound echoed in the distance, irregular, like water leaking from a high ceiling onto something soft. As she neared the covered painting, a strange pressure settled over her chest, the kind that makes you forget why you walked into a room, the kind that feels like eyes are already on you. She hesitated before pulling the curtain aside. There it was, a portrait of a woman sitting in a high-backed chair, her hands resting neatly on her lap. She wore a faded blue dress, antique in style, with lace fraying at the collar. Her posture was still but not rigid, almost as if she had just sat down or was about to stand. But it was the eyes that caught Evelyn. Wide, dark, and so familiar. She stepped closer. The surface of the canvas glinted under the faint museum lights. The varnish cracked like dried skin. A chill passed through her, trailing the length of her spine. She squinted at the woman's face. Her features were delicate, but the more Evelyn stared, the more something shifted. The shape of the nose, the curve of the jaw. Was it belighting? The woman looked a little like her. A low hum began to rise in Evelyn's ears, like the buzz of power lines overhead. She blinked, taking a half step back. The eyes in the painting were still locked onto hers, but now the pupils seemed dilated, as if the painted woman had just seen something terrifying, or perhaps something exciting. "Miss?" A voice croaked behind her. Evelyn spun. A museum employee stood in the shadows, an older woman with pale, papery skin and a name tag that simply read Miriam. Her lips barely moved when she spoke again. "That wing's not open to visitors after dusk." Evelyn cleared her throat. "I'm sorry, I didn't see any sign." Miriam tilted her head slowly, her joints clicking faintly. "It's all right. Most people don't see the portrait at all." The way she said it made Evelyn uneasy, like it wasn't simply hidden, like it was waiting. She glanced back at the painting, but the curtain had somehow fallen back into place. Miriam stood by the wall, unmoving. "I swear," Evelyn murmured, "the woman in that painting looks exactly like—" "Don't say it," Miriam cut in sharply. Her voice had the bite of brittle glass. "Don't ever say who she looks like. That's how it begins." Evelyn frowned, unsure whether to laugh or ask more. But something about the trembling in Miriam's hands told her this wasn't some performance. The museum wasn't crowded. In fact, had she passed anyone else on the way in? She stepped away from the curtained wall, her reflection briefly caught in a dark glass case beside her. For a moment, she thought she saw the woman from the painting standing behind her. Just a flicker, a hint of lace, and pale skin. The sound of wind howled suddenly through the hallway vents. It didn't just whistle. It moaned, carrying with it something that sounded eerily like a whisper. Evelyn turned quickly. Miriam was already gone. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. The woman's eyes haunted her. Those two familiar eyes. She sat at the edge of her hotel bed, her laptop screen glowing in the dim light. She searched for anything she could find about the painting, but there were no digital records, no artist name, no title. The museum's website didn't even list the West Wing as part of the exhibition. The only hit she got was a vague blog post from 2006. There's a portrait in Black Hollow that changes over time. The face shifts. It starts to look like you, and when it does, it's too late. Her fingers hovered over the keys. A soft creak came from the hallway outside her room. She stood slowly, her heart beating like distant thunder. She moved to the door, placing her ear against it. Silence. Then a soft scrape, as if something dragged across the carpet. She opened the door fast, expecting to find nothing. Instead, she saw a framed photo lying face down in front of her door. She picked it up. It was an old black and white portrait of a woman in a high-backed chair. But the photo had been scratched, the face defaced beyond recognition. Only the eyes remained, and they were hers. A quiet, breathless sound escaped the hallway, barely audible, like a shiver turned into a sigh. Back in the room, Evelyn locked the door and shut off the light. But the moment she sat back on the bed, the whispering returned. This time, it wasn't from the hallway. It was inside the room. A soft voice, curling around her ears like smoke. "You look too long." Her eyes darted to the mirror on the far wall. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw someone else sitting where she was. A woman in a faded blue dress, blinking, smiling. Evelyn awoke to the sharp crack of thunder and the low, shuddering groan of wind pressing against the window pane. Rain slashed the glass in rhythmic fury, like fingers clawing to get in. Her chest felt tight, breath shallow, and for a moment she forgot where she was. The hotel room was dim, lit only by the flickering television she hadn't turned on. Static buzzed from the screen, gray and angry. She grabbed the remote and shut it off, but the faint buzz remained. It wasn't the television. It was in the air. A soft electrical hum, low but constant, like power surging through hidden wires, or something alive just below the surface of reality. Her eyes drifted to the corner of the room, to the mirror. It was tall, antique, its wood frame dark and carved with curling roses and twisted stems. Her reflection stared back, pale and wide-eyed, hair tousled from sleep. But there was something wrong. She leaned closer. The woman in the mirror was her, yes, but her expression was not the same. The face looked calmer, still, almost posed. And the eyes, they were too dark, too focused. The knock came suddenly. 1, then 2, then 3. Slow and deliberate. From the other side she stood, walked slowly to the door, her heart thudding like a war drum. She didn't ask who it was. Something in her bones told her not to. She looked through the peephole. Nothing. Just the hallway, dim, with a flickering light bulb swinging slowly overhead, as if something had brushed against it. Still, something lay on the ground again. She opened the door a crack and reached out, snatching the object like it might burn her. It was another photograph, a newer one. Her, standing in front of the painting. She remembered no one taking this picture. In it, her eyes were turned slightly, looking off to the side, toward the woman in the portrait, whose features were now even clearer and even more like Evelyn's. She stepped back, hand trembling. The photo began to feel warm. She dropped it to the floor. It sizzled. Thin wisps of smoke rose from its edges, curling like the scent of burned dust in a forgotten attic. She stepped away, backing into the room, only to hear another sound. Breathing, slow, shallow, inside the room. She turned sharply. No one. But the mirror was fogged now, as if someone had exhaled against the glass. A single handprint smeared across the surface, fingertips trailing downward. She didn't scream. She couldn't. Instead, she grabbed her coat and her notebook, stuffed them into her bag, and left the room without looking back. The hall was colder than before, her boots echoing louder than they should. She descended the stairs 2 at a time, ignoring the front desk clerk who barely looked up as she passed. Outside, the rain had stopped. The streetlights buzzed, moths circling frantically, and a strange quiet settled over the town. Evelyn didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to move. The museum, it had answers. The doors were locked, of course. It was well past midnight, but the side gate to the garden was ajar, swaying gently. She slipped through. The garden was overgrown. Wild vines coiled around statues whose faces were worn smooth by time. The windows of the museum stared blankly down, like dead eyes in a stone skull. She found a door in the back, rusted but slightly open. Inside, the smell hit her first. Old varnish, rotting wood, and something faintly sweet, like dried flowers left too long in a sealed jar. Her footsteps were muffled on the thick carpet. The west wing lay ahead, shrouded in silence. As she approached the portrait, she noticed the temperature drop. Her breath fogged in front of her. Every step felt heavier, as though the air itself resisted her. The curtain was already open. The woman stared out from the canvas, her face now eerily, unmistakably Evelyn's. Even the scar above the right eyebrow, the one Evelyn had gotten from a childhood fall, was there, painted in exquisite detail. "No!" she whispered, voice shaking. "This isn't possible!" A click behind her. She spun around. The hallway was empty, but the sound came again, slower this time. A dragging sound, wood against stone. Or was it bone? She turned back. The woman in the portrait was smiling. No teeth, just a small, knowing curl of the lips. And now her hand had moved. lifted just slightly, palm open. As if waiting to be held, the frame trembled, the hum returned, louder now, vibrating in Evelyn's ribs. Then a sound, a whisper, wet and close to her ear. "Stay with me." Evelyn bolted, through the hall, past the exhibits that blurred in her vision, statues that seemed to twitch in the corners of her eyes, paintings that turned their eyes to watch her. Doors groaned as she passed, wood expanding like lungs inhaling. She made it to the front entrance and shoved hard. It didn't budge, locked. She pounded on the glass, screaming. Outside, no one moved, not a soul in sight. The street, the lamps, the buildings, all still, frozen. Then, the reflection. Not hers. In the glass door, the reflection standing behind her wore a faded blue dress. Its eyes were too wide, its smile cracked and twitching. The breath on her neck was cold. She turned slowly. Nothing there. But when she looked again at the door, she was gone. No reflection at all. Only the woman in blue, standing where she should be, grinning. The museum lights snapped off one by one, each with a soft pop, plunging her into darkness. The last thing she heard before the black swallowed her was the slow, rhythmic knocking, echoing from inside the walls. Evelyn didn't remember falling. She only remembered the cold. When her eyes opened, she was lying flat on the museum's marble floor, the air around her dense and unmoving. The world above her spun slowly, shadows swimming like oil across the vaulted ceiling. A ringing filled her ears, high and persistent, as if the last light had died with a scream. She sat up, groaning. Her palms were scraped. Her bag was missing. The front doors were gone. Not locked. Gone. Where there had been glass, iron handles, and the faint reflection of the street outside, now there was only a blank stone wall, seamless, as though the entrance had never existed. A low pulsing sound throbbed in the background, almost like a heartbeat, slow and wet. It echoed faintly through the corridor, coming from deep within the museum's belly. Evelyn stood on shaking legs. The silence pressed in on her like damp cotton. No wind, no outside noise, no hum of lights or distant traffic. The world beyond the museum had vanished. Or she had. She turned slowly, half expecting the portrait to be behind her again. It wasn't. The hallway was empty. But as she walked, the layout felt wrong. The West Wing had only 2 branching corridors. Now there were more. Doorways where there hadn't been before. Hallways that twisted at unnatural angles. She passed a gallery lined with mirrors. Not paintings, just mirrors. All of them cracked, some shattered into sharp, jagged webs. Yet even the broken ones reflected her, though the versions of herself inside looked off. Some too pale, some too still. One was smiling, just slightly. A soft scrape echoed to her left, wood sliding against floor. She froze. The sound came again, not walking, dragging, slow and heavy, like something moving with resistance. "Hello?" she called, her voice brittle. No reply, only the sound of breathing, close, labored. She backed away, entering a nearby room. It was a small exhibit space filled with old furniture. Victorian armchairs, a cracked piano, a child's wooden rocking horse, its paint flaking. The air smelled of mildew and something sharp, metallic. She closed the door behind her and pressed her back to it, trying to steady her breath. The piano let out a soft note, a single key. She turned toward it, heart hammering. No one there. She crept forward slow. Another key pressed down, a low, broken tone. Then a third, higher this time. Discordant. The piano lid began to creak open. She reached out trembling and slammed it shut. Silence returned. Then the horse creaked, rocked. Once, twice. Something giggled. A child's voice, whisper soft, just above her shoulder. She ran, back into the corridor, her footsteps loud now, frantic. The layout twisted again. The museum folded in on itself. The walls breathed. She turned a corner and stopped cold. The portrait was there, but no longer hung. It stood at the end of the hallway, propped against the far wall, as if waiting. The woman's face was clearer than ever. The smile had grown, wider. Teeth now, white and too many. And the eyes, they followed her. Evelyn took a step forward. The air rippled. The paint seemed to shimmer like heat above asphalt. The woman's hands, once still on her lap, had moved. Now they were reaching, pressed against the inside of the canvas, palms out. Fingers spread. One of the fingers twitched. Evelyn's scream caught in her throat. The canvas stretched slightly. Like fabric under pressure, she saw the portrait again. Each fragment showing a different version of the woman. Some smiling, some crying. One of them screaming without sound. The corridor light flickered and then failed. Darkness swept over her like a tidal wave. She turned and ran, her breaths coming in gasps, feet pounding stone. A low moan trailed her, rising and falling like a distant siren. She didn't know where she was going anymore. The museum had become a maze, shifting behind her. Every hallway looked the same, every room too quiet. Until she reached a door marked Restoration. She pushed it open. Inside, the room smelled of turpentine and old cloth. Broken frames leaned against the walls. Canvases in various states of decay littered the tables. In the corner stood a man, or what used to be one. His back was to her, hunched over a cracked painting. His arms were thin, barely flesh, stretched with veins blackened like roots. His head twitched to the side in short, jerking spasms. She opened her mouth to speak, but he spoke first. His voice was dry, crackling like paper caught in flame. "She's not supposed to smile. She never smiled before." Evelyn stepped closer, cautiously. "Who?" He didn't turn. "The painted one. The cursed one. She watches. Then she learns. Face by face." Evelyn's voice cracked. "What does she want?" His fingers trembled as he traced something on the canvas. To be free, but not alone. He turned at last. His face was featureless. No eyes, no mouth, just stretched blank skin, like a canvas. But he smiled, not with lips, with shape. The skin rippled, forming the shape of a grin. Then he collapsed, a dry, hollow sound like paper folding inward. The room began to shake. Frames fell, lights burst, and on the far wall a new painting appeared, unfinished. It was her, but only halfway. One side of the face was still brushstrokes, the other disturbingly real, and the eyes, those wide, familiar eyes. They weren't painted, they blinked. The scream caught in Evelyn's throat but never escaped. She stumbled backward from the painting, her gaze locked on the pair of blinking eyes embedded within the half-finished portrait. The canvas pulsed subtly, like the skin of something breathing just below the surface. Her own face, its left side still rendered in oily brushstrokes, seemed to move in ways paint shouldn't. The eyelid twitched again, the corner of the mouth lifted, a half smile, crooked. Wrong. She turned and fled. The door slammed shut behind her without sound. No thud, no echo, just a vacuum of silence that felt like it swallowed every footstep she made. Her breath was ragged, but even that seemed muffled, like screaming into a pillow soaked in cold water. The corridors twisted again. They didn't creak or groan. They bent. Evelyn passed a staircase that spiraled downward, but it wasn't there before. She could see only 5 or 6 steps before the darkness swallowed the rest like a throat ready to choke. She kept moving forward, avoiding every open door, every side passage. The silence wrapped tighter the deeper she went. She reached the main gallery again, or what she thought was the main gallery. The paintings were all wrong. Each one hung straight, untouched, yet their subjects were blurred, human-like figures, all with faces obscured by smears or long black streaks running down like tears. No titles beneath the frames, no artist names, just cold plaques carved with one word: waiting. She stepped carefully past them. Her boots barely touched the ground, yet a sound followed her. Not her own. Footsteps, soft, bare, coming from behind. She turned suddenly. Nothing, but one of the paintings had changed. The figure inside had turned its head. Now it faced her. Its eyes were open, and they were hers. She backed away slowly, heart clenching. A soft sound began to rise in the room, almost imperceptible at first. A brushing, like bristles sweeping against canvas. Then it came again. Scrape, scrape, as if something inside the walls was painting or erasing. She moved faster now, past the gallery, into another corridor where old portraits hung crookedly, dust layering them like a veil. All of them featured the same woman, sometimes in a chair, sometimes standing beside a window, sometimes behind other people, but always watching, always with that faint smile. And in each new portrait, she looked more familiar. Not just like Evelyn, but like others too, emerging, as if the painting were stitching together every face it had seen. Evelyn's hand brushed against a frame by accident. The painting fell. Glass shattered. No alarm sounded. But something else cracked. Loud, deep. The floor beneath her rippled slightly, like disturbed water. She ran again, deeper into the belly of the museum. She didn't notice she had entered the atrium until she was standing in the center of it. beneath a massive glass dome that revealed only black sky, not stars, not clouds, just black. A single spotlight turned on above her, illuminating the center of the atrium floor. A pedestal stood there now. It hadn't been there before. On it, a painting, wrapped in cloth, framed, waiting. Her name was carved into the brass plate at its base, Evelyn Carter. The air pressed in, thick, still no sound. Even her heartbeat had faded. She reached out, trembling, and slowly pulled the cloth away. It was her, painted perfectly, sitting in the same position as the woman in the original portrait, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes wide and smiling. Only this smile was not her own. It was stretched wider, forced. Like a grin carved into a mask, she stepped back, swallowing hard. Click. A soft sound behind her. She turned slowly. The lights above the other galleries began to turn on, one by one. In every opening, a new painting, each of them depicting her, not just in different poses, but in different states. One showed her sleeping, one showed her screaming, one showed her decomposing, the flesh flaking from the canvas, painted in vivid, rotting detail. Her legs buckled. She collapsed to her knees, gasping. The silence shattered. All at once, the air filled with whispers. Dozens, hundreds, all around her, layered, spiraling. Too many voices to separate. She looked too long. She let her in. She smiled back. Now she hangs. And from above, a new sound. A creaking rope. She looked up. Something dangled just beyond the top of the dome, too far to make out. But it spun slowly, back and forth, back and forth. The light above her flickered, and then she saw it. A canvas, not hung on the wall, but suspended. From the dome, swinging like a noose. Her painted face stared down from it. But it wasn't a reflection. It was her, and she was blinking. The ropes groaned above her. Evelyn remained frozen on the marble floor of the atrium, her eyes locked on the suspended painting that swung slowly like a pendulum. Her own face stared back at her, half painted, half alive. Its eyes blinked in rhythm with her own. When her breath hitched, the lips on the portrait curved. That grotesque smile widened. Then the rope snapped. The painting dropped fast, too fast for her to react. But it didn't crash. It didn't shatter. It simply vanished mid-air, like it had been swallowed whole. The silence returned. But now it had teeth. She crawled backward on her hands, her palms slick with sweat and grime. Something under her nails felt wrong, too smooth, too damp. When she glanced down, her hands were pressed against the atrium floor, but the stone had changed. It was no longer marble. It was canvas, tightly stretched, painted. She recoiled. Every inch of the floor now displayed hundreds of faces, all contorted in various expressions. Grief, terror, confusion. Eyes stared up at her from beneath her knees, mouths agape in permanent, painted screams. Some bore remnants of recognition. Others looked disturbingly blank, like unfinished portraits waiting to be completed. One of them was her. She scrambled to her feet, and ran toward the nearest hallway. With each step, the air grew thicker, warmer. The scent of paint, fresh oil, and turpentine clung to her clothes. The walls no longer felt like stone. They pulsed, ever so slightly, like flesh beneath a thin film of plaster. She rounded a corner and found herself in a narrow corridor lined with empty frames. Dozens, some ornate, some simple. All of them mounted on the walls, yet each held only raw canvas. No images. No faces, until one twitched. She stopped. The canvas in the frame nearest her began to ripple as if breathing. The surface expanded, then deflated. Wool. A faint wheeze followed. Evelyn took a slow step backward. The canvas bulged outward. A handprint emerged. 5 slender fingers pressing from behind the fabric. The tips strained against the surface, almost breaking through. Then, nails, long, yellowed. They punctured the fabric, tearing thin slits as the fingers slid out like roots through soil. She screamed and turned to run, but the hallway had changed again. The exit was gone. The empty frames now held faces. Some were people she didn't recognize. Others, she stopped breathing when she saw her mother. Painted in grayscale, her head tilted slightly, lips parted like she had been whispering. Her eyes were soft, tired, just as Evelyn remembered from her last hospital visit before the cancer took her. Then the eyes rolled back, the mouth opened. From the canvas, a hoarse whisper emerged. "Why didn't you come back, Evelyn?" Evelyn stumbled to the side. The next frame showed her father, his expression blank. His body slumped in a faded armchair. "You forgot me, didn't you?" More frames awakened, voices whispering, accusing. "You left. You watched us fade. You looked away." Their words merged into one guttural chant. "You looked away. You looked away." She covered her ears and ran. The corridor bent impossibly, climbing upward like a spine. She climbed the incline, her knees weak, every breath a struggle. At the top, she reached a circular room with a single object in its center. An easel, and on it a frame. But this one was empty, fresh, waiting. Beneath it lay a palette, a brush. A cracked mirror leaned beside the easel, its reflection warped and stained. When she looked into it, she saw not herself, but the woman from the first portrait, still smiling, still watching. The walls around the room began to shift. They weren't walls, they were frames, and inside them, but dozens of Evelyns, each in different poses, one screaming, one reaching, one asleep, one already decayed, flesh melted into the canvas like wax near flame. She backed into the center of the room, her feet brushing the base of the easel. Then the brush moved, on its own, lifted, dripping with red. It hovered near the canvas, then slashed a single streak across where her face should be. The frame exhaled. A gust of warm air hit her chest. The canvas flexed. Evelyn turned and slammed her hands against the wall, searching for an exit. She found a hand too silent. She stood, shaking, and realized the room behind her was gone. No door, just a flat wall. A whisper trailed through the hall like smoke. She belongs in the frame. Evelyn ran again, though she no longer knew what direction meant safety. Her mind was splintering. Memories blurred. She remembered childhood birthdays, the scent of her grandmother's house, the way her brother laughed when he scared her. But even those memories began to fade, like old photographs, losing color. She reached a narrow stairwell, and she climbed. Every step creaked. Every creak echoed like bone snapping in the dark. At the top, a single room. She pushed the door open slowly. Inside was the original portrait, hung high on the far wall. But now it was complete. The woman in the chair was no longer unknown. It was Evelyn, fully painted, eyes wide, smile stretched, hands resting neatly in her lap. The plaque beneath read, "Gifted by Evelyn Carter, the final subject." Then came the sound again. Scrape, scrape, paint being applied. Behind her, she turned. A second easel waited, and the brush had already begun. Her hand, her shoulder, her unfinished mouth, still smiling. Evelyn stood paralyzed before the easel, watching the brush trace her face with unnatural precision. It hovered in the air, guided by invisible hands, bristles soaked in dark red. Too dark for paint. Every stroke added another piece of her to the canvas. The shoulder, the collarbone, the curve of her lips, still frozen in that half smile she never meant to give. She wanted to scream, to stop the thing from finishing her, but her body wouldn't move. Her feet were rooted, her arms heavy, her lungs filled with something thick and cold. The air in the room pulsed, rising and falling like a giant's breath. The brush twitched once more, then stilled. A pause. Then it turned toward her, hovered, and with a slow, deliberate motion, it dragged itself across the canvas. Through the eyes, a soft sound filled the room. Not quite a moan, not quite a whisper. It was her voice. "Let me out." The brush dropped. Silence. The painting was complete. Evelyn stared at it, unable to look away. The woman on the canvas was her in every detail, yet not her. The figure's eyes gleamed with wetness. The pupils dilated slowly, and then blinked. Her breath caught. The canvas blinked again, this time in perfect sync with her. She tried to turn away, to break free, but her reflection in the room's single cracked mirror had shifted. It no longer mirrored her movements. It stood still, wide-eyed, lips parted. Then it smiled. Not hers. The smile stretched unnaturally, splitting the cheeks into a grin that tore just slightly at the corners. Blood ran from the edges in thin streams, tracing the jawline like crimson vines. From the frame behind her came a deep groan. Wood, warping, something pushing from within. The frame around her painted self expanded, the wood splintering outward as if straining to contain the thing inside. Evelyn backed away. Her heels struck something. A canvas. She turned. Dozens of them were stacked against the wall, each one labeled in fine gold script. Subject 021, Wallace H. Subject 022, Miriam K. Subject 023, Thomas C. Subject 024, Evelyn C. Her breath stopped. Thomas, her brother's name. Her fingers shook as she pulled the canvas free. It was covered in a pale sheet. She peeled it back. There he was, Thomas, painted just like her. Same wide, frightened eyes. Same half smile. The memory hit her like a hammer. The last phone call, his voice strained. He said he had seen something. A painting. Said it changed every time he looked at it. Then silence. Weeks of searching. No answers. She thought he had run off. Or worse, he hadn't run. He had been framed. The canvas began to weep. Not metaphorically, actual tears rolled from the eyes of his painting, staining the bottom of the frame. Then a voice, his voice. Evelyn, don't let it finish you. The sound echoed unnaturally, as if coming from behind her eyes. The door to the room slammed shut. A low growl rumbled through the walls. Paintings shuddered. The temperature dropped. From the far end of the room, a new figure emerged, not walking, drifting. Its face was wrong, too smooth. Painted flesh, brush-stroked features sliding slightly with every movement. It wore a smock, splattered with old color, and in its hand it held a long, thin brush, dripping with something that sizzled as it hit the floor. It tilted its head toward her and smiled. The same smile, the one from the canvas, the one from the mirror. It raised its brush and pointed at her. The lights went out. Darkness swallowed everything. Then a flash, bright, blinding, and suddenly she was outside the room, in a hallway again. She didn't know how. The door behind her was gone. She touched her face. Still skin, still breath, but something was wrong. She ran to the nearest mirror, found it cracked, but still reflective. What she saw wasn't quite her. Her pupils were too wide, too black. Her smile twitched at the edges without command. Her movements lagged, just a second behind her intentions. And when she blinked, the mirror didn't. She touched the glass. Her reflection did not. Then, slowly, it did. But it smiled when it moved. Not her smile, not anymore. She backed away, whispering to herself, "This isn't real. This isn't real." But the whisper behind her disagreed. "It is. It always was. You just had to look long enough." She turned, but no one was there. Only a single frame. Empty. Still warm, still breathing. She stared at it, heart pounding. And from deep within the frame, she saw something begin to take shape. A shadow, stretching toward her. Her hands began to tingle. She looked down. Paint, thick, red, smearing across her fingertips. Her veins glowed under her skin, faint and golden, like threads of oil spreading through paper. From somewhere below the museum, she heard the chorus of the forgotten. Dozens of voices, hundreds, calling, begging, screaming. And all of them, hers. Evelyn moved like a ghost through the shifting halls of the museum, the air thick with the scent of linseed oil, mildew, and something sour beneath it all, like rot sealed in plaster. The whispers had quieted, but they hadn't disappeared. They clung to the corners of her thoughts, brushing the edge of comprehension, like the echo of a name you can't quite place. She no longer knew how long she had been inside. Time folded in on itself here. The lights didn't flicker anymore because there were no lights. The illumination came from somewhere else now. As if the walls themselves emitted a dull glow, like skin stretched over bone, veined with gold leaf cracks. Her fingers were stained. No matter how much she rubbed them against her coat, the red wouldn't come off. Not blood, not paint, something between. She had seen the canvas breathe. She had heard the voice of her brother bleeding from a frame. And now, every step deeper into the museum pulled her closer to something she could no longer deny. She was being painted. Not just copied, not just watched. Something was building her, brushstroke by brushstroke, layer by layer. And with each completed detail, she felt less solid, less human. She turned into a narrow hall she hadn't seen before. There were no paintings on the wall here, just raw canvas stretched from floor to ceiling. Endless sheets of it, rippled and torn in places. They moved slightly in the still air, as though something stirred behind them. A sound rose, barely audible at first. Scritch, scratch, like a quill on parchment, like fingernails carving into soft wood. It came from just beyond the canvas. She reached out, pressed her palm against the surface. Warm. Something pressed back. A hand, larger than hers, bonier, cold. It slid along the fabric, mirroring her movement. She pulled away. The shape behind the canvas moved, slow and deliberate, gliding to the left, then vanishing into a ripple of fabric. A breath gusted through the corridor, heavy and wet, as if exhaled by the building itself. She kept walking, further in. The path narrowed. Soon, the canvas lined both sides of the passage, like veils in a cathedral, swaying as if something passed just behind them. Then, the whispering returned, but this time, it wasn't voices she knew. They spoke in strokes and symbols, in wet flicks of brush on flesh, in the sound of nails tapping wood in rhythmic patterns. She didn't understand the words, but she felt them. They were painting her name, over and over, carving it into walls she couldn't see, etching it behind her eyes. Evelyn Carter, Evelyn Carter, Evelyn Carter. Each repetition grew heavier, hungrier. She emerged into a chamber lit by hanging bulbs swaying from invisible cords. A workroom. The floor was covered in drop cloths soaked with paint, but they squelched when she stepped on them. She looked down. The cloth moved. Beneath her feet, something twitched. The paintings in this room weren't on display. They were stacked, piled, some leaning, others broken. Canvas torn like skin ripped open. Some frames were twisted into unnatural angles, as if they had fought their own transformation and lost. And then she saw one, an unfinished portrait, a girl, young, barely 12. Only the eyes were complete. They blinked. A whisper broke the silence, cracked and breathless. Don't let them finish you. Evelyn knelt before the canvas. The girl's mouth twitched. Tears leaked from the painted eyes, cutting streaks through the pigment. What are they? Evelyn asked, voice trembling. The girl didn't answer, but the paint did. It moved, pooled, and rose. From the wall behind the easel, the canvas began to tear. A long, slow rip, like fabric screaming. Hands pushed through, pale, boneless, fingers tipped in bristles. They gripped the sides of the tear and pulled. What emerged was not human. It was the painter. Its face was smeared with old color. Its eyes were hollow brush holes. Its mouth a gaping stroke across where lips should be. And in its hand, it held the brush again. It raised it and pointed to Evelyn. Behind her, the other canvases shifted, dozens of them. A sea of eyes opened, some blank, some pleading, some furious. One voice rang above the others. Thomas! "Run!" he whispered. Evelyn turned and bolted. The hall pulsed behind her. The fabric lashed out. Threads curled around her ankles. Paint sprayed from the walls in hot bursts, but she kept running. She reached another door, an iron one this time, rusted, heavy. It groaned open. Beyond it, stairs, descending. She didn't hesitate. She ran downward, 2, 3 steps at a time, the sounds of pursuit closing in behind her. The painter shrieked, an awful noise, like canvas tearing underwater. The air grew colder, the walls closer, and then silence. She had reached the bottom. A door stood before her, smaller, wooden, plain. She opened it and stepped inside. It was a room of portraits, all unfinished, some missing eyes, some without mouths, some with faces that looked almost free. She stepped closer to one of them, her own incomplete. Only the hair and chin had been painted, but there was time. If she destroyed it, maybe the process could stop. She reached for the frame, and behind her, a voice. Too late. She turned. The painter stood at the threshold, and it began to smile. This time, her own smile. The painter stepped into the room. Its body shifted like wet ink spilled across parchment, limbs sagging, then tightening, its frame bending in unnatural angles that popped softly with each motion. The brush in its hand was long now, too long, its handle gnarled and splintered, stained with a slick black fluid that shimmered under the room's flickering light. Evelyn backed away from the unfinished portrait of herself. The canvas loomed tall and empty behind her, only fragments of her face etched in fine strokes. The curve of her chin, the shadows of her jawline, the faint beginnings of her eyes. She could feel it, the painting pulling at her. Her limbs grew heavy, her breath slower, her thoughts sluggish. Each second in this room frayed the edges of her will, like wind biting into old cloth. The painter raised its brush. The sound it made when it moved was not the swish of bristles. It was wet, a dripping, sticky sound, like something pulled from a throat. Evelyn darted left, knocking over a stack of cracked frames. They tumbled with dull thuds, one splitting as it hit the floor. Spewing sawdust and a gust of bitter-smelling air. The painter did not chase. It glided. It didn't need to rush. Evelyn reached the far side of the chamber, hands fumbling for anything. Anything sharp, anything heavy. She grabbed a rusted metal rod from a fallen easel and turned back toward her canvas. She had to destroy it. If the portrait finished, she would vanish into it, into the wall like the others. She raised the rod and froze. A voice was coming from the painting, not hers, her mother's, soft and broken. "Don't, Evelyn, please, it hurts." The varnish on the canvas shimmered. Her mother's voice dissolved into another, her brother's. "I'm still in here. I see everything. Please don't make it worse." The voice dissolved again, merged. Dozens of voices began to bleed from the unfinished painting. Layered, overlapping, whispering over each other in a swirl of terror and longing. Some begged for freedom. Others begged for death. And some simply laughed. Long, hollow laughter that carried the cold weight of madness. Evelyn lowered the rod, hands trembling. Was it real or just mimicry? Was this canvas holding them or echoing their last thoughts before they vanished? Behind her, the painter stopped. It spoke. Its voice was dry, sharp. Once the image is whole, the soul is sealed. Evelyn turned. The painter stood before another easel now, and on that canvas, a new face was forming. Hers, again, but different, younger, more terrified. Her 13-year-old self, crying in the hallway after her father died. The brush moved on its own, dragging fresh pigment down the cheeks to mimic tears. Evelyn's head throbbed. Visions slammed into her mind. Moments she hadn't recalled in years. Watching her brother disappear into the woods when they were kids. Peeking into a stranger's casket during a funeral and thinking the corpse blinked. Her first time seeing a painting that moved, long before the museum. A buried memory. She had seen this thing before. The painter, at a traveling art show in a rural hall when she was 7. An exhibit labeled Portraits of the Forgotten. She remembered staring too long at one canvas. The woman in it had looked almost like her mother. Almost. The eyes had followed her. And when she tried to walk away, the woman's lips had parted just slightly. Evelyn reeled. She turned back to her own unfinished painting, tore it from the wall, threw it across the floor. But the portrait did not shatter. It hissed. A thick crack appeared across the canvas, but it healed itself within seconds, the pigment wriggling like a scab stitching shut. The painter began to hum, low, melodic. Each note resonated through the room, making the canvases tremble. Some portraits began to cry. Others whispered in foreign tongues. The floor shook. Frames toppled. And then, a scream. Not Evelyn's. From the canvas itself. Her unfinished face screamed, the paint distorting into a wide, agonized expression. The surface boiled. The brush in the painter's hand exploded into flame, and then vanished, crumbling into ash. Evelyn ran, out the door, up the stairs. Her footsteps pounded against stone, splashing through puddles that hadn't been there before. The air above was different now, sharper, brighter. Somewhere behind her, the painter shrieked. A shrill, ear-splitting wail that sounded like 1,000 nails dragged across a chalkboard dipped in blood. She reached a new hallway. This one lined not with portraits, but doors, wooden, closed, each carved with a name. She scanned them. Margaret Whitlow, Jonathan S. Keller, Evelyn Carter. Her hand hovered over her own name. The door was warm. A whisper curled from the keyhole. Finish it. She backed away, but the door swung open. Inside, there was no room, only a black space. And hanging in that void, her portrait, now nearly complete. Only the eyes, because there was nowhere else left to go. The door slammed shut behind her. The darkness pressed close, and the final stroke began. The room breathed. Evelyn stood in the void beyond her door, suspended in a darkness so thick it swallowed sound. Her portrait floated in the center, luminous against the black. The canvas pulsed slowly, like a heart soaked in pigment. Her face was nearly complete. Only the eyes remained untouched, and the brush waited, suspended in air, tip trembling. Her breath echoed unnaturally, as if there were 100 lungs inhaling with her. For a moment, she thought she could still run. That there might be a hallway behind her, or a corner left unpainted in this maze of terror, but the void did not allow retreat. A sound slithered into the space. Not a voice, not music. It was the scraping of skin against wood, wet bristles dipped in varnish, bones shifting beneath a smock. The painter was coming. From somewhere above or below or behind. She could feel it before she saw it. A wave of pressure pushed through the darkness, rippling across the space. The brush turned in mid-air, slowly aiming toward the canvas, toward her unfinished eyes. The moment the bristles touched the canvas, Evelyn screamed. It wasn't pain, it was loss. Each motion of the brush scraped something from inside her. Not just her vision, not just her thoughts, but memories, feelings, names. The scent of her mother's perfume, the color of her brother's eyes, her favorite book. Gone. With each stroke, another piece disappeared, and the face on the painting smiled. It was almost done now. Evelyn tried to move, but her body felt distant, light, fading. She looked down. Her fingers had begun to blur. Edges smudged, color draining, like she was being erased from the world, one brushstroke at a time. The whispering returned, louder now, but not around her, inside her. 100 voices, all calling her name, some pleading, some mocking, some hers. From different times, different ages, a child's giggle, a teenager's, the voice she used when she lied, the one she used when she mourned. They all fought for space, but the loudest was the painted Evelyn. It spoke without sound. Its eyes were blank, its smile too wide. "Let go," it mouthed. "You're only paint now." She shook her head. Tears blurred her vision, though she wasn't sure she still had eyes. "I'm not finished," she whispered. The canvas pulsed again, brighter this time, and the gallery around her changed. Lights flickered on. Rows upon rows of portraits illuminating in sudden clarity. She was no longer alone. Hundreds of frames surrounded her, each one a person, each one blinking. Some cried silently behind the glassy sheen of varnish. Others stared without emotion. A few smiled, proud of their completion. They were all versions of her, slightly altered, slightly wrong. The painter hovered at the center, arms spread, its face a smear of expressionless joy. It pointed to the nearest wall. There hung Thomas, her brother. His eyes locked on hers. One tear ran down the inside of the canvas, and for the first time, his mouth moved. "Burn it," he said. She blinked. "What?" His voice was clearer now, stronger. "Burn it all." The pain in her chest intensified. Her limbs screamed, but her soul sparked. She reached inward. Somehow, she still had fire. A memory ignited. A match she struck as a child when the power went out. The smell of sulfur, the spark of control, the ability to choose. She reached out with what was left of her hand, shaking, blurred, and touched the edge of the floating canvas. It stung, but the canvas twitched. It feared her, not the painter, her. She dug her fingers in. The surface rippled, resisting. A scream tore through the gallery. Not hers, not human. The painter shrieked, spinning, a brush in its hand, catching flame without warning. Evelyn screamed back, with everything left in her. "Let them go!" The canvas erupted. A burst of heat flooded the room. The gallery trembled. Portraits cracked, some shattered. From every breaking frame, a soul spilled. Light, sound, shape. Some lingered, others vanished like smoke. The painter convulsed, melting into its own pigment, limbs folding, body collapsing into a pile of rotting canvas and bristles. The flames spread. They were not fire. They were release. Evelyn's body cracked like plaster, light bleeding from the seams. The gallery collapsed around her. Frames fell. Voices cried out, thankful, fearful, free. As the void crumbled, Evelyn saw her own portrait begin to peel. The smile faded. The eyes closed. And then, nothing. Only darkness. Only silence. Until a breeze. The scent of rain on stone. A creak of wood. She opened her eyes. She was outside, standing in front of the Black Hollow Museum. It was morning. Birds chirped faintly. People passed on the street, normal, alive. She looked at her hands, solid. No paint, no blur, just her. But in the museum's high window, a shadow stood behind the glass, framed, still, watching, and smiling. The world felt too quiet. Evelyn stood motionless on the steps of the Black Hollow Museum, her skin prickling under the early morning light. The sun had barely risen, casting long shadows that bled into the cracks of the pavement. Her breath puffed visibly in the crisp air, yet the warmth of reality felt fragile, like a thin film stretched over something deeper, something darker. Behind her, the museum loomed silent, too silent. It looked the same, the cracked columns, the rusted iron gate, the smudged windows that refused to reflect sunlight. But the presence was gone. The air no longer pressed against her lungs. No whispers swirled behind her ears. The frames weren't watching, or they weren't watching yet. She turned and walked away. Her legs trembled with each step, muscles unfamiliar after hours, maybe days, inside the nightmare. The street was beginning to stir. A man in a trench coat passed her without glance. A cyclist rang their bell, wheeled around a pothole, and vanished down the avenue. No one saw her. Or perhaps no one recognized what had come back. She didn't look back at the museum. Not then. Not yet. Her hotel key was still in her coat pocket. Room 406. She let herself in. The room was clean, undisturbed. The mirror still cracked from before. Her notebook lay open on the nightstand, the last page filled with ink-smudged sketches. A face half-drawn, wide-eyed, smiling. Her hand trembled as she touched it. The reflection in the mirror stared back, her own face. But she studied it carefully this time. Every shadow, every blink, it was her, whole. She washed her face slowly, the water scalding. The sensation grounded her. The pain was real. She was real. But when she closed her eyes, the silence returned. That impossible silence. Not empty, but waiting. That night, Evelyn tried to sleep. She couldn't. When she closed her eyes, she saw the gallery again. The frames twisting. The painter reaching. Her portrait blinking. Every whisper echoing in her skull. "Let me out! Don't look! Finish it!" She left the lamp on. At 3:12 a.m., she heard the knock. 3 soft taps from the window. Her breath caught. She rose slowly, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders, and approached. Nothing. Only the street, still and dark. Rain misted the glass like a thin veil. She pressed her forehead to the cold pane, a flicker in the reflection. She looked again. Behind her, a frame, standing against the far wall, a blank canvas inside, and beneath it, a plaque. She turned quickly. There was nothing there, but when she looked back at the window's reflection, the plaque was still visible, and on it, a name. Vacant. She stumbled backward. "No," she whispered, voice brittle. "You're gone. I destroyed you." The reflection shifted again. This time, a figure stood in the corner, faint, tall, wrapped in shadow. It held a brush. Its face was still smears, but it smiled. Her phone vibrated suddenly, breaking the spell. A call. Unknown number. She answered. A faint static hissed through. Then a voice, familiar. "Thomas. Evelyn. It's not over." Her throat went dry. "I saw you. I let you go." "No," he said, voice trembling. "You broke my frame. But the others, they're still waiting." "What others?" "They're everywhere now. Any museum, any gallery, even a mirror if you leave it long enough. The painter's work never stops." She gripped the phone tighter. "But I stopped him." A pause. Then Thomas whispered, "The painter doesn't die. He moves. He waits for the next name, the next face." And then a click. The line went dead. Evelyn stared into the mirror across the room. It fogged slowly, not from breath, but from the inside. Words etched in the mist. "The wall will need another." She dropped the phone. The frame was there now, standing in the corner, empty, waiting. It hadn't followed her. It had always been here, waiting for her to look long enough, to forget herself, to smile. Just once. She backed against the door, heart pounding, trying to tear her eyes away. But the frame was pulling, drawing the edges of her name, her memory, her breath, into its stretch of canvas. Then the sound came. Scritch, scratch, a brush against wood. Her lips trembled, but something else surfaced. Not fear, not panic, fury. She crossed the room and grabbed the frame. It pulsed in her hands, fighting her grip, its wood burning against her skin. "You don't get to have me," she said, voice shaking. The painter's whisper rose from within the frame. "You already gave yourself the moment you stared back." She hurled it against the floor. It didn't shatter, but it groaned. She stomped on it again, again. Cracks split across the canvas like lightning. A shriek ripped through the air. Glass broke, the mirror exploded, light bulbs flared and died. Then, silence. She stood over the broken frame, panting. It no longer pulsed, no longer breathed. The plaque at its base, now blank. She left it there. At dawn, Evelyn checked out of the hotel. She didn't go home. She didn't tell anyone. But from that day forward, she stopped looking at paintings, stopped walking into museums, never glanced at a mirror longer than necessary. And whenever she passed a window, she never looked at the reflections, because deep down, she knew the painter was still out there, somewhere, and the wall would always need another.